Back to Miller. Oh, my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beef Upfront podcast here on Pick Swap Media. This is your host, Ryan Coyle, back with another episode as part of our lead up to the college football season. We'll be doing individualized episodes on some of the top teams in the country entering the season. So far, we have hit on number 3, Ohio State, number 4, Alabama. Today's episode will be hitting on number 1, the Georgia Bulldogs, the reigning national champs, back-to-back actually. But last year they went 15-0 en route to that back-to-back national championship. They're led by head coach Kirby Smart, who will be going for his 3rd straight national title this year at Georgia. And that would be the first three-peat since 1936 when the Minnesota Golden Gophers done it. So it's certainly been a while, nearly 100 years. And doing it in the SEC, the most elite conference in the country in terms of college football, would be certainly an accomplishment. And I think winning this 3rd one would certainly make Georgia the cream of the crop in college football. It's been Alabama for so long, and I do think Georgia is at the top right now, but there would be no argument anymore if Georgia is able to go and pull off their 3rd straight national title and be the first team to do that kind of in the modern era of college football. But last year, Kirby Smart led this team to a 15-0 season, another national title, beat LSU in the SEC title game, had a thrilling game against Ohio State in the college football playoff semis, and then they pounded probably the biggest beatdown in sports history in a championship game, beat TCU 65-7. Just looked like a game that these two teams didn't belong on the same field. It was literally a college team playing against a JV team out there. All TCU's lucky breaks finally got the best of them. And Georgia really just went out there and exposed them. This team is now without, though, the quarterback that was leading the team, steering the ship the past 2 years for this Bulldogs offense in Stetson Bennett. He went out and got drafted to the Los Angeles Rams, but he was the game manager, but he certainly stepped up in big moments and led that comeback charge against Ohio State in the college football playoffs. So some big shoes to fill there, and that's the main kind of topic of discussion for this Georgia team entering the season. But they had some key losses last year, obviously, to the NFL draft. This has become an NFL factory down there at Georgia, recently just producing high-level player after high-level player. But when those high-level players go out, there's just another batch ready to come up that have been working and developing and that have been recruited by Georgia over the past few years. So last year's team did lose 3 key players to the first round. Jalen Carter went number 9 to the Philadelphia Eagles, and reports out of Eagles training camp, as an Eagles fan, he's been nothing but a stud so far. And he had his off-the-field issues that made him fall to number 9, but he might eventually wind up being the best player out of that entire draft. Broderick Jones, a first-round pick by the Steelers, and then Nolan Smith as well to Philadelphia at the end of the first round. They had 10 players total selected. Quarterback Stetson Bennett, obviously a big name there. He didn't go until the 4th round. Tight end Darnell Washington to the Steelers as well. And then cornerback, their starting corner last year, Keelan Ringo, he also was drafted by Philadelphia. So Philadelphia went out and drafted 3 players from Georgia's defense last year. But a lot of, like we said, a lot of players, a lot of key guys, starting offensive lineman, starting edge rusher, starting defensive tackle, your second string tight end, starting corner, starting quarterback, all out the door. So certainly some big shoes to fill. But we'll get into the offense, defense, and kind of what to expect from this year's Georgia team that enters the season at number 1, the favorite to go back and win the national championship again. It's going to be a new look offense, though, because offensive coordinator Todd Monken made the jump to the NFL, and he went to the Baltimore Ravens, and he'll be leading the charge there as the offensive coordinator. And back-to-back national championship quarterback Stetson Bennett, finally out of college. It seems like he was there for 30 years, and he's 30 years old now. But he's with the Rams, so we're going to have a new look on offense. I know Stetson Bennett played a lot of game manager type role last year, and the offense certainly had a lot of talent, but Todd Monken really was one of the better college football minds, and I think that's what made him an attractive asset into the NFL last year. Last year, the offense for Georgia averaged 50 point. Last year, the offense for Georgia averaged 501.1 yards per game and 41.3 points per game. Both of those ranked 5th in the country. So with all the talk with Georgia usually surrounding the defense and the defensive factor that they've been producing, and most of those guys have been going off to Philadelphia with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Coyle Ringo, Nakobe Dean as well. The Eagles love the Bulldogs. I'm just a little bit giddy about that with my Eagles fandom. But besides that, so much talk and hype has been surrounded the defense with this team, but the offense has been very dangerous as well. As we've said, 501.1 yards per game and 41.3 points per game last year, both ranked 5th in the country. So an offense that could certainly put up points and was certainly explosive and dangerous in their own right. They do bring in Mike Bobo as their new offensive coordinator, and it appears that junior Carson Beck is in line to become the starting quarterback for the Bulldogs. It sounds like it's still a bit of a competition, as we talked on with Alabama as well and Georgia as well. Ohio State as well. This is still a pretty open quarterback competition, and sophomore Brock Vandergrift shouldn't be ruled out either, but it does appear Carson Beck appears to be in the lead for right now. 3 starting offensive linemen returned from last year's team, and the offense has arguably the best non-quarterback in the country with tight end Brock Bowers, who most likely will be a top 10 pick in next year's NFL draft. Over his 2 years in college, he has 119 catches, 1,824 receiving yards, and 19 receiving touchdowns in just 2 years. This is one of the more dynamic guys, and he's able to run the ball out of the backfield as well. I believe he has like 3 rushing touchdowns and over 100 rushing yards. They use him as kind of like an H-back at times. Dominic Lovett is a big-time transfer receiver heading to Georgia from Missouri, and his running mate at receiver is going to be Ladd McConkey, who McConkey's been one of the best receivers in college football these past few years. So whoever is the quarterback this year for Georgia, whether it's Carson Beck or Brock Vandergrift, most likely one of those two guys, they have plenty of weapons surrounding them. And I think this quarterback is in a better situation to succeed when it comes to throwing the football than whoever winds up becoming the quarterback at Alabama. And that could be one of the biggest game changers in terms of who wins the SEC this year. McConkey, though, is just as solid as they come, and him with Brock Bowers forms such a great 1-2 punch as probably the main 2 guys. And then Dominic Lovett coming in out of the transfer portal from Missouri. That's going to be 3 really explosive playmakers. So running back room headlined by Kendall Milton, who did average 7 yards per carry last year on 85 carries, but this is a group that is expected to rotate their backs due to the mass amount of talent that this entire offense has. Trying to keep all those guys happy and feed all those mouths down there in Georgia. So an offense that could take a step back, I think, initially ushering in a new face at offensive coordinator and at quarterback, but they're still going to have plenty of talent to work with, and the offense could be, have another top 10 type unit this season, I think. Then when you go to the defense, when you think of college football defenses nowadays, your mind goes right to Georgia. It used to be Alabama, but now it has to be Georgia. They've just been churning out NFL draft picks left and right, with last year having the 2 first-rounders in Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith. The year before, they had a number of them as well: Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis. This is a team just NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick. A lot of turnover, though, that means with Smith, Jalen Carter, Coyle Ringo. Those are the guys most notably gone, but they also return a lot, with Michael Williams looking like he's going to be the next guy to emerge as that star on the defensive line for Georgia, and they return a lot up front just across the defensive line as a whole. Despite losing Jalen Carter, they could be better across the board, which is hard to think of. Carter is a huge loss, was arguably the best college football defensive player last year. But this is a group, as we talked about, just infusing more talent and more guys that are ready to go. And Michael Williams looks like he's going to be the guy to really be the driving force up front. The linebacker play, I think, though, has really driven the defense over the past few years. And they returned Jason Dumas-Johnson and Samelo Mondin Jr. on the inside. 2 very dynamic linebackers who are going to be competing for that Butkus Award winner to be the best linebacker in the country. Both these guys are going to be calling the signals. They're back with a lot of experience, and they're able to really help out the youth that's going to be present on the secondary and the defensive line up front. Christopher Smith, a big loss at safety, but the defense just has another group of 5 stars ready to roll in. If you want to be an NFL defensive player, you're going to have to go through some stiff competition, but if you're one of these 5-star guys, you should just be looking at Georgia, because they're sending these guys up to be first-round pick after first-round pick. There's a reason to believe with all the returning talent, especially at the linebacker spot, I think those guys calling the signal will really help some of these younger guys kind of emerge sooner. This new infusion of guys, as well as the returning talent, I think there's reason to believe this defense can be a better unit than last year. And last year, the defense only allowed 14.3 points per game. That was fifth best in the country, and 296.8 yards per game, which was 14th best in the country. So if they're able to surpass that and the offense is able to kind of keep up that top 5, top 10 thing, there's no reason to believe that this team can't go undefeated again and go back to a national championship. But there's a reason why it's never been done since the 1930s. And going through the SEC, as we know, is a gauntlet. So a lot of turnover and a lot of returning talent. It's a kind of a good mix of both, an infusion of youth coming in as well. We'll see what Georgia's made of if they're able to go back and win that third straight national championship. But when we look at their schedule, let me give 1 second to share my screen. I have this Georgia team going actually 11-1 in the regular season. I do have them losing a game in the regular season. Might sound a little bit surprised because this is actually probably one of the easiest schedules in college football this year. You open up with UT Martin, Ball State, 2 layup games there. South Carolina going to be better this year, but you get them at home. UAB, usually a pretty solid group of 5 team, but at home you should roll them. At Auburn, their first year under Hugh Freeze, still should be a pretty easy win. Versus Kentucky, going to be a bit of a battle. They can play the physical brand of ball that Georgia likes to play, but I think that's a win. At Vandy, that's a win. Versus Florida, where I think Florida is going to be kind of in a downward spiral at that point. It's a neutral site game in Jacksonville, should be another win. Missouri, another win. Ole Miss, I think Ole Miss can hang with them, put up some points maybe, but another win. But this is where I have them losing. At Tennessee, I think it has more to say about what Tennessee's been building and the kind of dynamic atmosphere that they have down there in Knoxville at the moment. We saw what happened last year with Alabama. They're going to get up for this game. That'll be the biggest game of the season for Tennessee at home. And I just think it's going to be too hard to go back-to-back undefeated. I'm not saying they won't find a way to make it into the college football playoff and go win the national title. But going down to Tennessee, I think it's just going to be too hard to go back-to-back undefeated. And that's really the Florida game's always a big game, but it's not going to be that close or competitive. Kentucky should be kind of tough. At Auburn won't be a cupcake just because it's at Auburn. They're going to be getting up for Georgia coming in. But I still think this Tennessee game is the first huge, super big game on the schedule. And that inexperience at quarterback spot where it's either going to be Beck or Vandergriff coming in, they're not going to have that experience like Stetson Bennett kind of did these past few years in the big game. And I think that might come back to hurt them a little bit. So I have Georgia then eventually beating Georgia Tech as well. But I think this team is set up to have another really strong year, but I have them going 11-1. I think that'll still be good enough to win the East because Tennessee does have to play Georgia, Alabama, I believe Texas A&M as well. I do think the Tennessee team is going to take a bit of a step back this year as well, maybe be like a 9-3 team, but I do think they're able to knock off Georgia there. I do think, with all that being said, Georgia does find their way back into the SEC title game, though, winning the East. And then whether they face off against Alabama or LSU most likely in the SEC title game will most likely depend on if they go back to the college football playoff or not. But I just think going back-to-back undefeated 15-0 is just going to be too tall of a task for a team that has rolling in a new quarterback, as well as a lot of returning players. But as we've talked about throughout the show, guys in big spots that are going to have to step up and play under this pressure that we haven't seen before. So there's a lot of parity in college football for a reason. Even when Alabama was as dominant as they were, we saw Clemson kind of get in there and get a few titles of their own. LSU had that win as well. The SEC is so hard, such a gauntlet. It wouldn't surprise me to see them slip up once. I think going to Tennessee certainly won't be an easy game. So Georgia going 11-1 in the regular season, and kind of all else depends on how the rest of their opponents and what else in the standings shakes out, whether or not they'll make it back. But I'm going in an 11-1 record this year for Georgia, another really strong year, and going back to the SEC title game is my eventual prediction. So that'll do it for my take on the number 1 team entering the season, the Georgia Bulldogs. Our next episode will be hitting on the Michigan Wolverines, and that'll clear out our top 4 for this season heading into it. And then we'll kind of get into some of the teams in the tier below a little. We'll be hitting on Clemson, Florida State, Notre Dame, USC, Texas. So we got a bunch more episodes coming your way. We got a little under 3 weeks now until the season really kicks off, but only 11 days until we get some week 0 football. So Thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and make sure to stay tuned here to Beef Upfront on Pick Swap Media all season for your college football coverage.